So my name is Andrea. I'm with Juris Education. With me, I have Mika and Lindsay, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. We do make up part of the Juris Education team. Tonight's webinar is all about the LSAT, the LSAT's most challenging sections, I should say. Before we really get into the nitty-gritty of tonight's presentation, I have just a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, this webinar is recorded. That ends up being the number one question throughout the presentation. Is it recorded? Yes, it will be. We're hoping to run it for about an hour. So we'll have an hour's worth of conversation, dialogue. We'll have Q&A, actually a couple Q&A sessions. And we'll be going through all of the nitty-gritty hard stuff that comes with the LSAT. So we'll be speaking about the components of a successful LSAT score. Of course, impactful study tips from top scorers. Mika and Lindsay will be sharing their scores with you momentarily. And then, as mentioned, we'll be doing some real LSAT Q&A, kind of walking you through the process. I'll let our expert tutor share that in a moment. And of course, that Q&A. But before I do that, I promise you, I just want to take a minute of your time to introduce our team. There's a ton of new faces in here. If you've been on our webinars before, welcome and probably know the drill. If this is your first time, again, welcome. We're super excited to have you here. We're excited for this discussion tonight. As mentioned, we're Juris Education. We're a globally recognized law school consulting firm offering comprehensive support from test prep to law school admissions and even bar exam tutoring. With a 94% acceptance rate, our students get into the top law schools in the United States. Last cycle alone, our T14 acceptance rate was 34%, 35%, which is almost 6 times higher than the national average of 5%.
Looking out the rivers is probably fairly fertile.
That means we're good at what we do. So we believe in starting the law school application process as early as possible, which is why we offer something called pre-law advising and profile development. This focuses on building each student's professional cover letter and resume to highlight their most meaningful experiences. We also help candidates boost their academic transcripts and GPA, find stellar internships, create a timeline for LSAT prep. All of this is done with one goal in mind, and that's to get applicants into their dream. Our private LSAT tutoring assesses each student's strengths and weaknesses. This then helps create a custom study plan structured for the weeks, days, and of course, months ahead. We tailor our approach to each student's unique needs and schedule, providing the right assessments and lessons as they become familiar with the test content, strategies, and format. Now, on average, we do see a 12-point increase with our 45 plus hours of tutoring. And with our 60-hour program, we do have a 165 plus LSAT score guarantee. Once we've helped shape an outstanding candidate, we support in creating the perfect application. So this looks like the creation of a well-balanced list of safety, target, and reach schools. We also help students by building strong letters of recommendation and obtaining letters of recommendation from the right recommenders. Or I should say build strong resumes and obtain letters of recommendation. Our admissions counselors, who are also essay writing experts, will brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essays and personal statements until they are perfect. Our goal is to build the perfect candidate and application. We use every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create with our students stand out from the rest. We're excited to be here. We're excited to assist you with this process, and we look forward to all your consultations. With that being said, I would love to pass it over to Mika and Lindsay to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I figured since I'm first on the slide, I'll go first. I'm Mika McDonald. I know some of you have been to webinars that I've hosted before, or I've been a speaker at before. So I took the LSAT twice in 2011. I scored a 172 on my first attempt and a 179 on my second. I went to the University of Chicago Law School and then worked as a corporate restructuring litigator for about 5.5 years, and came back to teaching during the pandemic and have been here ever since. I'm excited for this. Is a new one, so I'm really excited to give this presentation tonight. So I'll turn it over to Lindsay to introduce herself.
Thank you. So I'm Lindsay Woodard. I'm in Athens, Georgia. I think I saw one person in the comments. It's also in Athens. So that's exciting. I'm an admissions counselor here, and I took the LSAT in 2015. One time I scored a 173, and then went to the University of Georgia Law School and practiced doing estate planning and estate administration for almost 4 years. in Athens, Georgia, and then quit that job a couple of years ago to spend more time with my family and do something a little bit more flexible. So I'm really enjoying this and excited to be here. And then so first, we'll talk about components of a successful LSAT score. So one important part is understanding the argument structure. So you want to break down the argument, identify premises, conclusions, and logical flaws. So 80% of the arguments on the LSAT are bad arguments. So that's one important skill that we want to teach is identifying those bad arguments. What are the flaws? How to spot them? And then something encouraging, for me at least, was skills that you learn for logical reasoning are going to be applicable in other sections of the LSAT too. So for example, sufficient and necessary conditions is one key concept to understand for logical reasoning. And another example would be cause and effect is something that is huge in logical reasoning and reading comprehension. We'll talk about that more later tonight. But want to get down those key skills, learn how to break down an argument, evaluate it, spot those common fallacies, and practice evaluating the assumptions and drawing inferences. And then we also want to talk about active reading strategies. So highlighting key ideas, relationships, the author's tone. The more you look at reading comprehension questions, you'll realize they're all written in a similar style. So once you get the hang of the way the LSAT writers write these questions, it'll start to come a lot more naturally. We'll talk about diagramming a little bit. That's another active reading strategy. You don't have a ton of time, so we don't want to do anything too elaborate, but just some keys and some ways to make notes to help yourself save time.
Okay, so the skill base of logical reasoning, right? What do you need to be able to do to actually master this section? Lindsay gave that overview already, so this is just kind of burying deeper on the same stuff, but being able to identify the parts of an argument. There are literally two question types named main conclusion and role of statement, right? Identification is a key skill on this exam, being able to say this statement is a premise, this statement is an intermediate conclusion supported by that premise. Critical, and not just to these identification questions, but to breaking down arguments and strength and weak and necessary assumption and so on later on. Second big thing is to understand the types of argument structures that are used. So one is like inductive logic, which I also like to refer to as just like Sherlock logic, right? You're looking at the state of the world and trying to reason about how it got that way. What is the explanation for it? And then you have causation arguments that are based on comparisons, right? Those are really common, for example, in medical studies, right? A placebo group and then a test group, right? And the comparison between the results helps them determine causation. So each of these structures shows up on a repeated basis, and being able to quickly identify which structure is there, super important. Next step is the value of evidence and the types of evidence, right? I just kind of mentioned some. So we have these comparisons, right? Where we have two groups that we're comparing. That's a type of evidence. Correlations are obviously a type of evidence. There's a lot of different types of evidence, but seeing how to attack, right, or remove the value of certain types of evidence is something that plays a big role in multiple question types. With respect to flaw questions, right, there are certain flaws that recur so often that there's just a big list. I like to call them the famous flaws. And so some are like whole and part errors, reversing causation, drawing causation based solely on a single correlation. Just learning each of these flaws and their names helps you spot it more quickly when they're doing it in a question, right? It's one thing to be able to look at a question and reason naturally, but this is a time-pressured exam. So knowing the names of things accelerates that process. Hidden assumptions, right? A huge percentage of necessary assumption questions, for example, are where the author is already very obviously making the assumption in their head, right? Being able to see what the author is assuming without saying and then calling that out is a core skill, and more broadly. And then Lindsay mentioned earlier, right, conditional logic and diagramming. Typically people's least favorite part of the section, but if you are trying to get a 160, 170 plus score, you're going to have to learn how to handle this both from like an organic, I'm reading and I have to answer without diagramming. And then when you get to those 4 and 5 stars, you kind of need to have that diagramming strength, right? Like that's very important for us. So huge skill set baked into the LR section, a lot of stuff to learn, a lot of stuff to memorize, a lot of stuff to do and do and do until it's instinctual. So kind of following on the same stuff here, but every piece of written media is a narrative, even if it's nonfiction, right? Authors have goals and aims behind the way they write things, right? There's always intent. So understanding the overall story the author is telling, understanding how each paragraph is advancing and contributing to that story. And then as Lindsay pointed out, any actual instance of clear author opinion is a major thing to capture, right? A good proportion of the questions in reading comp are either author opinion or author intent. And so that whole category really focuses on, can you understand the author, what the author is doing here? Like I said, and I saw someone left a note in chat earlier about like an example of my note taking. I'll talk and maybe in the next one we can do something like that. But taking notes, I am a big proponent of taking notes, right? And I think you all heard it last time if you were here. The literature, the research out there makes it very clear that the best method for memory retention while reading is to take handwritten notes. It just is, right? It drives it home much more strongly into your memory than anything else can. So highlighting, while good, doesn't have that nearly that level of effect. I also think having good notes is a really good idea for having a map of the passage when you're trying to retrieve information later. But as Lindsay pointed out, these need to be quick, right? Writing out like 4 sentences of notes for a paragraph that's 9 sentences long doesn't make sense, right? You have to do this quickly and you have to be efficient in how you're doing your note taking, because reading comp on this test is crazy time pressured. I don't know, maybe that's one we can do in the future, a reading comp specific one, and I can do that. Last thing. A lot of the types of passages here involve characters, right? That character might be a school of thought on something. It might be a competing artist. You're going to highlight noteworthy about one artist, and then this is their like opponent. All of these characters can play a big role in questions because all of these characters are usually given their own opinions by the author, right? Where they stand on certain issues. It's really, really, you can't get, what's that, tunnel vision about just focusing on the author and the main subject of the essay. You need to be thinking about all of the people playing a role and what they think about this. And I also say these non-author opinion and these like broader inference types questions are also among the hardest ones there are, right? So if you're thinking about like that difference between mid 150s to mid 160s to 170s, part of it is this exact area. Yeah. Any thoughts, Lindsay?
Oh, Lindsay, you're frozen.
Okay. Okay.
We'll just give her a minute to.
Should I just keep rolling and then she can jump in when it reconnects?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Okay.
I think you've covered it.
Oh.
I totally agree.
Oh. I think she got dropped entirely. Okay, well, we'll pick it back up. I'll just keep us rolling.
Yeah. I think
Yeah. I'll keep us going. So, I see a lot of questions about hours. We'll tackle that at the mid-break where we have a little mini Q&A, and then, yeah, we'll return to it, I promise. So, logical reasoning questions, how to actually attack them when you're at them, right? I will say, like, every question type has its own little, like, process that you should be doing, right? They're not identical. You don't just all look at them and go, what's the right answer? You go, okay, what is this? What is this? What is this? So, right, if I were in a necessary assumption question, for example, the first thing I'm looking for is what's the main conclusion? And then I'm going to aggressively attack why the author believes that conclusion to be true, in the hopes that I can find the author's hidden assumption, the one they're making in their head, but they didn't actually put on paper, right? On the other hand, if I'm looking at a principle-based question, or principle strengthen or principle conform, I'm really looking for in the stimulus, okay, there's a set of facts in the stimulus, and then there's an outcome in the stimulus. And I'm looking for a principle that connects those facts to that outcome, right? So the way you approach questions is going to change based on which type you're looking at. Second part is people jump to answer choices too fast, right? Ideally, on most question types, you'll spend at least 5 to 20 seconds before looking at answers, anticipating the answer, right? Thinking in your head, what is the answer likely to be, right? And you can spitball specific ideas, or you could just be like, this is a strengthened question. They have one correlation to prove causation. You know what would be really helpful? A no cause, no effect correlation that would strengthen the argument, or I could find the direct method of action by which A causes B. So I may not give any specific words, but I also know that these two concepts are likely to show up as a potential right answer choice. So there's a lot of like pre-learning here, and anticipation plays a big role. It's a lot easier to get misled by well-written wrong answers if you don't stop and anticipate. And the LSAT is deliberately written that way, right? They are trying to trap you. So it's good to pause and think, then jump in. Reading comprehension questions.
Right.
Reading comprehension really loves the out of scope, but sort of on topic answers, right? So answer choices that relate, broadly speaking, to what's in the passage, but they're not really on scope for what the question's asking, or they're like adding new info to the passage in a way that can't be supported. So a big ability in reading comp is simply remembering what isn't right. You see what I mean? Like knowing I can look at this answer and say, the author just didn't talk about that, or they wouldn't have talked about that given what they're trying to achieve in the narrative. I'll add another one for reading comp really quick, which is more so, even more so than LR, different types of questions have different strategies, different methods here. If you're dealing with a question that I would call like a locate detail question, okay, locate detail, if you took good notes, then hopefully that map helps. But you also have a search box that's built into the exam, right? That'll search the text for you. So being able to use that search box effectively, and that is a skill, knowing what terms to search for and when to use it. But that's a big part of like taking a locate detail that takes 1.5 minutes to do and turning it into a 30-second question, right? But on other question types, using the search box would be super counterproductive, like crazy counterproductive. So there's a lot more variance here on how you attack each individual question type. So the strategy really here is to be aware that you need multiple strategies, right? And to be developing those strategies as you practice and improve. Yeah. All right. We'll roll over. I think this is the check-in for Andrea.
Yes, it is the check-in. Okay, so what does that mean? What is a check-in? It's exactly what it sounds like, where we just take a minute out of the presentation to see what's happening in the chat, the questions, the comments, the concerns. We also take it as a moment to we have some fantastic questions. One just popped in, and I'll let you ladies get to it in a moment. We also
Okay.
take it as a moment to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to us. I know we have a ton more value to provide. As a thank you, we want to offer a 10% off discount for any one of our amazing programs. And also to let you know that we do offer free consultations. So if you have any kind of specific questions, or you're not sure about the process, or any question you may have, not myself, but one of my wonderful colleagues at Juris will be able to help you out with that. Admissions counselors, admissions experts, really the best of the best, the top scores. We can put you in direct contact with them via those consultations to make sure you get any and all your answers, questions answered, I should say. Excuse me. Seems like I'm losing my voice tonight. Okay, I see some of the questions have been answered, but there was one question, and it looks like a lot of people like bumped it up. And it's, how long did you all study prior to taking the exam? I think Lindsay may be frozen again, but Mika, I know you have a lot to say on this one. I'll let you go first.
I would say that I studied like a full-time job for about a little over 2 months. So all told, I probably put in about 150 hours, 200 hours before my first exam. After I took my first exam, I took a couple weeks off. And I also was teaching the ACT and SAT for Kaplan back then, so I immediately added LSAT as well, and I started teaching it. So I was studying on my own and teaching it before my second exam, and I got a 179. I'd say probably all told, that was another 150 to 200 hours. So what I tell students is you need to be putting in at least 100 hours of study to even get like close to scraping your max score. And honestly, I don't think that even 200 hours is enough to hit your actual max. Oh, thank you. But I think the big thing I would say is plan ahead, right? I know some of you are non-traditional applicants, you're working, you're parents, you have to balance a lot of stuff. So that means you need a much longer runway. But even for people who are students right now, you've got other stuff to balance. You've got internships during summers, right? If you're a junior and you're planning to take next year, right? Now is probably a good time to sort of start and build a sustainable study schedule. I don't recommend people do what I did, which was I just treated it like my full job and I did nothing but the LSAT for a few months. I don't think that's as effective as the build-up method. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, the next question. When you say search box, what does that mean?
So prior to this past year, you were allowed to use the Control F function on your computer, the find bar, to search text and reading comp. As of this past cycle, they disabled the Control F, but they actually built in a search box like into the upper left-hand corner of the screen. So any test prep website you're using should have that already built in, since they rolled that out over, 8 months ago, 9 months ago. But yeah, and you type a term in and it'll automatically highlight any instances of that in the text. Yeah.
Okay, we'll answer one more question before we get on to the rest of the webinar. I want to be mindful of time, and we will try and get back to as many of these questions as possible. Mackenzie asks a very fantastic question. If you take a practice test after some studying and get a score you're happy with, what's the best way to maintain that score until you take the LSAT for real?
Keep doing it. I mean, in all honesty, like if you are at a score that you are happy at and you still have time to go, why not aim higher and get a scholarship? But if you're just trying to maintain that score, then yeah, you will have to regularly practice. If I were to stop doing Like I didn't do any LSAT related stuff for a good 9 years, right, while I was in law school and then working as an attorney. And so I had to refresh myself when I came back to teaching it. I wasn't a 179 when I first like started getting ready to teach again. I was like, no, I need to like jump on and do a bunch of practice myself before I'm ready to do this again. So I would say like, I don't know, practice tests a week at minimum. Yeah, something like that. But I would just say aim higher and get a big scholarship.
So
That's
Mika,
better than anything else.
Mika, can you share the correlation between scholarships and your score?
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb that like every additional point on the LSAT is worth about $10,000 in scholarship money, right? So another way to say it is if you're able to get into Harvard and then you get 1 point higher than that LSAT score, you'll get $10,000 on average, right? So each point really does represent a lot of debt saved down the road. And I can testify to that. One of my great mistakes in life was going to UChicago because I was paying full price there. I could have gone to UMichigan, which is a very comparable school, and had about $50,000 to $60,000 less in debt. And I really wish I had done that because debt's not fun.
I think both of those schools are in the top, I think T5.
Yeah, top 10. Yeah, top 5. So, you know, that would kind of be my big advice is it's not just about getting into the best school possible. It's about thinking about life after, right? And what it's like to have $200,000 in debt that you're paying down. So aim high would be my biggest advice. And don't think you have to go to the highest ranked school you get into. I mean, think about everything that's going into it and where your career, like, it's also funny because when I went to UChicago, I wanted to go back to my hometown in Nashville and work there. And it's like I could do that from Michigan as easily as UChicago. Like there's really no difference between those two for that goal, which again drives home I should have taken the money. So think about your goals and where you need to be and think about the scholarships you can earn and aim as high as possible.
Amazing. Okay, so let's get back into the presentation and we can go from there.
All right. So refining your approach, right? Like you start by studying everything one at a time, right? You go through question types, you go through reasoning types. That's good. That's how you gain the basic skills. But when you start talking about translating that into a score, right, you also have to be doing full sections. One of the things I like to point out is like, if I give a student a practice set of 25 strengthened questions, that's not as mentally, like the endurance trial on that is way lower than a real section because you don't have to switch your mindset the entire time. But on a real LSAT section, you get a main conclusion, a strengthen, a necessary assumption, a weaken. You have to keep changing your mindset. And you can't practice that without practicing it on full sections and full exams. I also always point out, don't force yourself into the time limits when you start. A really good rule of thumb is choose what your goal score is and do untimed practice until you hit it. And then you switch to timed, and yeah, your score is going to dip again, but then you'll climb back up to that goal score. But if your goal score is a 165 and you're at a 157, why are you doing it timed already? You're not at your goal score yet. Focus on skill acquisition, then speed training. Don't force yourself to do both at once. That's counterproductive. And conditional logic. I actually had a student like this earlier today, where her analytics showed that she was a good 10% better on non-conditional logic versus conditional logic, right? It's something that a lot of students go through as part of the growth curve where they realize that their conditional logic skills are holding them back. And conditional logic questions are a good 20 to 33% of the test. So it's not like it's a small area, right? Sufficient assumptions, must be truths, parallel reasoning are all to some degree or sometimes conditional logic oriented. With reading comprehension, I just keep hitting this idea of what is the author trying to do, right? I can read an essay and say, this was the author's goal, and these were the techniques they used to try and achieve that goal. Doesn't matter what text you hand me, I'm still going to be able to do that because that's what I'm reading for. And that's the skill you're trying to build here, is the author writing about this scientific innovation because they disagree with it, or because they want to explain how an old theory was replaced by a new theory, right? Are we looking at this legal topic because the author wants to highlight its impact on a marginalized community? Or are we looking at this topic because the author wants to argue with two other schools of thought about how to approach a situation, right? Think about the goals. Paragraphs. I don't know. I wrote for a living, right? I was a litigator, and I was the type of litigator who just did research and wrote briefs. That was basically all I did for my 5.5 years as an attorney. Understanding how authors develop their ideas over time, right? Why this paragraph followed this, why this information started the paragraph, and why this information ended that paragraph, right? Again, all really important stuff to understand. It gets back to that idea of what is the author trying to do. And last part, we talked about note-taking earlier. One thing I will say is that my notes are rarely actual sentences. Lindsay earlier mentioned causation, and she had the CE, cause effect. I usually just do a little arrow. So if the author gives me a 3-sentence explanation on how A causes B, my note will just be A arrow B, right? So finding ways to take ideas and then turn them into tiny compact notes that you can write quick. It's not just something that I teach, it's also something we all have to develop. Finding your own shorthand, what phrases make sense to you, what symbols make sense to you. And that stuff matters for speed. So practicing that and thinking about how you can improve your note-taking methods is important. And I will also advise all of you to get good at writing notes by hand on paper. It's something that will serve you well throughout your entire legal career, not just as an associate, but also to protect yourself. Contemporaneous handwritten notes are some of the most valuable pieces of evidence in law. Yeah. So let's roll on. Core LSAT skills. Yeah. I think some of you have heard me say before, I really don't like most strongly supported questions. That's the primary inference type. I don't like it because it feels the most unpredictable. And I think it's kind of the most the vast majority of the questions on the LSATs are about identifying and interacting with arguments. Only a couple of question types on the logical reasoning section ask you to make inferences. So it's also the skill that we tend to practice least when we're prepping for the LSAT, which makes it a dangerous area. It's easy to overlook how dangerous this question type can be. So I think that's really important. Strengthened questions, I think, are just the stepping stone for weaken necessary assumption and to some degree flaw, right? Understanding how to make an argument better also helps you start understand how to make an argument worse and to how to think about what's necessary for the argument to work. So in terms of 2 core question types, those are really, really good ones to focus on. I would also add paradox questions, which are my favorite question type, which are just little detective stories, right? They give you something that looks paradoxical and you put on, what's the Sherlock Holmes hat called? Can't remember the name of it. But you put on your little Sherlock Holmes hat and you try to figure out, how do I resolve this paradox? What could explain how this could happen? I find that fun. And I also, again, think that skill of resolving an issue helps you create issues with the other question types. Reading comprehension. We haven't talked about comparative passages at all. So 3 of the 4 passages in any given RC section will be a single author writing a single essay. 1 of the 4 will be what we call the comparative one. comparative passage, and it'll have two authors, right? They're both kind of writing about the same thing to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the passage. They may agree on things, they may disagree on things, they may have issues they both care about, but they don't fully explore. But in these questions, in this like passage, it's a lot more about that comparison. Can you see what the authors are disagreeing or agreeing about? Can you see how they're interpreting things differently? I particularly like the question type where they ask you to give a title to each essay. I think that's fun. So comparative passages, I remember when I started studying for the LSAT, these were only introduced in like the PT 56 or so. And my real LSATs were 63 and 64. So there were only like 5 examples of these passages when I took the LSAT. Now there's a good 40 or so. They tend to get overlooked, right? It's much easier to focus on the rest of the RC section. But there are a few critical strategies that you can learn pretty quickly if you focus on it. And finally, this time management idea. I am a big fan of what I would say is adaptive time training, right? With the clear idea there is, I am not going to go from untimed practice where I take 47 minutes to 35-minute timed practice all at once, right? That's a huge jump to try and force yourself to make. I think it's a lot more productive to say, okay, I've been taking 47 minutes, now I only get 45. And then the next time after that, I only get 43, and then 41, and then 39. And then I work my way to 35, and I start the whole process over again. A lot of speed gains are small. It's not like there's like a silver bullet, or what is it, silver bullet, magic bullet, that suddenly makes you fast. Right? It's a lot of incremental improvements. And when you jump from 47 to 35 all at once, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to make those incremental improvements. So whenever you all start doing like the time training, please gradually work your way to the time limit. Don't just throw yourself at it all at once. I guarantee you will make more progress my way than that way. Guarantee it. Yeah. Okay. Study habits. Yeah. You know, it's one thing to like learn the material, right? All y'all are smart, right? But studying effectively is not a skill that everyone has been taught. In fact, it's not a skill that most people are taught. We just kind of get tossed to the wolves and said, like, do your homework. And that's it. Like, just do it, you figure it out. But there are better and worse ways to study for this exam. So first and foremost, consistency matters when it comes to learning, right? If you just haphazardly do some LSAT study every 2 or 3 days at random times of day, that's not going to be, even if you just did 1 hour the first day and the second day at a consistent time, that would be better. If you do it in a consistent place, that's even better. The more comfortable with our surroundings we are, the better we learn, and the better we test, which is why I tell people to go to their testing center ahead of time, like an hour ahead of time, and just get comfortable with the setting. Excuse me. But when we establish consistent study times, our brain knows that. Right? It's the same way you have a sleep and waking cycle, right? Your brain can adapt to a routine. And so if you study at 10 a.m. every Saturday until 3 p.m., eventually a couple weeks later, your brain is just going to be ready at 10 a.m. You will be in LSAT mode, and that maximizes improvement and retention. Second thing is like just consistency. Like, again, I've been an attorney. I lived off of my calendar. I've been screamed at by partners for, turning in something like 15 minutes after when they asked it, right? Schedule those study times, be consistent, honor that schedule, commit to the process, right? You're committing to a couple $100,000 in debt potentially, and 3 years in school, and locking yourself into a potential career path after that. So if you're willing to commit yourself to that, you should be willing to commit yourself to a study schedule. That's all I'm saying. Reviewing. It's not enough to just get an answer wrong and then read the answer explanation on whichever, test prep website you're looking at, or you go look it up online. There's a big difference between just passively reading and then rewriting that explanation in your own words and thinking about how you can spot that issue in the moment next time, right? Understanding why something is wrong or right after you got it wrong is good. But what you really need to understand is, how do I see it as I'm doing it? And that takes a couple extra steps of thought and work. Sorry, my cat is just demanding attention right now. But I guarantee if you force yourself to ask that question constantly, you will improve, and probably quite quickly. Yeah. All right. I'll work through these pretty quick because I know we have some actual questions to do. So number one, burnout is a real thing. Mental fatigue is a real thing. This is intellectually intense. Think about how long you can study for one chunk of time happily. Take breaks if you're starting to lag. Sitting at the library, half studying, half being on your phone is not nearly as effective as taking a 20-minute break and then coming back and studying intently, right? Number two, it is so easy, again, burnout, and then on test day to get tilted, right? Emotional maintenance and management is a core part of any intense endeavor, right? Just wait until you appear in court for the first time. That feels intense. So how do you handle that stress feeling? Well, you got to practice stuff. You got to have strategies, mindfulness, breathing, closing your eyes, centering yourself. These are really valuable life skills, guys. Not just for this test, but for the rest of your career, because you're going to panic in the middle of a law school exam at least once. I did. And knowing how to just get yourself back to focus into the flow is really, really important. And then finally, distraction-free zone as much as possible, right? Unless you're taking in a test center, in which case you should deliberately go take some practice tests at a library or maybe even a coffee shop, although I think a coffee shop would be too loud. But if you're taking in the silence of your own home, right, remotely, that's how you should be studying, right? Mirror test day conditions the best you can. Yeah. Okay. Commitment. I already said this, y'all. You don't get a 170 just by winging it. Nobody does. I have never met anyone that has. Consistency. I like this one. Like, running a marathon requires consistent practice. You can't just take a few sprints and a long run here and there. I remember when I had an ex-partner who ran the Brooklyn Half Marathon, like, she was out there running, like, I don't know, 5 days a week for 4 or 5 months ahead of time, right? You have to practice. And then active review. I said question journal earlier. You don't have to keep a question journal, but the research says it's good. The research says it helps. Even if it feels burdensome, the research says that it will help you improve faster. I just want to emphasize that, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's one thing to say, I don't enjoy doing this, but it's not, that's what this isn't about. Like, this is about getting you the best score possible. So be active in your review. Keep a question journal. I think it will help a lot. Okay. Whew. Should we just dive in?
So Mika, before we dive in, I just want to let everyone know there's a ton of questions in the chat. We're going to go through a couple of logical reasoning questions. So we might go over time, Mika, if that's okay with you, so we can just get some of these. There's some really awesome discussions happening in here.
Absolutely.
So I know this was supposed to go for an hour, but bear with us. We want to make sure that we give you as much value and answer as many questions as possible. All while going.
I am going to sit now because I've been standing for an hour already. There we go. Whew. Okay, much better. Back starting to feel good. All right. Okay, this one should be fun. So Which one of the following, if true, best helps to explain why the sale of the company's cologne dropped that year? So this is this is not a strong paradox setup, but the idea is we are finding an explanation for a surprising outcome, maybe. So let's check this out. The company that produces men's cologne, they've been advertising it in general circulation magazines for several years. One year, they said, no, we're just going to do exclusively in sports magazines with a predominantly male readership. Okay, they're selling cologne, not perfume, so I can see why they'd think that. But that year, the company sold fewer bottles than it had in any of the 3 immediately preceding years. So clearly, there was a backfire, right? They thought that it would be good to go to the people they thought were their clients. And when they advertised directly to those people, no, they actually lost sales. So let's do an anticipation here, right? Why would that happen? Maybe the people who read these sports magazines don't wear cologne, right? Just because they're men doesn't mean they're the type of men that wear cologne, right? So it could be that this was just a bad idea. Like the general circulation magazine was actually reaching more men who wear cologne. I saw one in chat, which I think is a great idea, which is, what if the wives are the ones that are buying their husband's cologne, right? It's not the men that they should be advertising to, actually. It's the wives of the men that they should be advertising to. So that's another great idea, right? It's just they misapprehended who their real customer was. But at the end of the day, right, what we're talking about is causation. And fundamentally, most of the LR section of the exam is about causation, right? How do we logically infer causation in a particular scenario? So let's check them out. A, television advertising reaches more, we don't care. Done. I'm done. Did we ever talk about television? No. No, this is out of scope. They're introducing new info. A is out. B, the general circulation magazines in which the company had placed its advertisements experienced a large rise in circulation recently. This is the tempting wrong answer, because it tells us, oh, maybe the general circulation magazine is a good idea. But this says it has now had an increase. We're comparing this year versus the 3 preceding years, not this year versus what this year could have been with the general circulation magazine. Y'all see what I'm saying? We only care about the prior 3 years. So B is out. C is one of these answers where it's not really doing anything, like telling us that most men don't wear cologne on a regular basis. Well, somebody buys it, and we still want to market to those people. D, there we go. I can't remember who said that earlier, but it was a great thought process. Women often buy cologne as gifts for male friends or relatives, right? So by taking their ads out of general circulation, they kept any of these women from seeing those ads. And so as a result, none of those women bought that type of cologne as a gift for their friends. D is a great answer here. The weird one at first, but it's a great idea of causation, right? And then just E, successful adverts, who cares? Right, like the fact that it like features well-known athletes, well, then why did the sports magazine do poorly? If anything, E deepens the paradox, right? It's making it even less understandable. Yeah. Or E, I mean, sorry. So yeah, D. They stopped advertising to a group of people who were buying their product. Bad marketing decision. Yeah. Such a real world thing too. Okay. So this is a reading comp question that we've pulled out, which kind of works because they're specifically asking us to analogize to this this particular part of the passage. So this is what I would call a defined or specific target reading comp question, where it's being very specific about what it's asking for, right? This is an analogy to this particular topic in this particular part of the essay. But you'll often see questions that'll say something like, which of the following is true based on the passage? That's it. No target whatsoever, no paragraph, no topic. It's just anything in the passage is fair game. Those are hard. And that's where that search box I mentioned really, really helps, right? But here we've got a defined target, so let's look at it. The history of global diversity can be summarized as follows. After the initial flowering of multicellular animals, there is a swift rise in the number of species in the early Paleozoic times between 600 and 430 million years ago. Then plateau-like stagnation for the remaining 200 million years, and finally a slow but steady climb through the Mesozoic and Cenozoic eras. So that's kind of interesting, right? You see that little line drawn underneath there, right? I think Lindsay was going to do this slide, but she pointed out the great idea here is if I am analogizing to some sort of like pattern, why not just do a little sketch of the pattern, right? And so we have a swift rise and then stagnation and then a gradual increase, right? So now we're looking for something that is most analogous to this, right? Something that is most similar. So I'm basically taking this trend I've observed, the up, flat, slow up, and I'm looking for an answer choice that describes a similar trend, right? So like if I look at A, the number of fish in a lake declines abruptly, then makes a slow comeback. Well, that's just kind of like this and then this. But I'm looking for this, this, this. A is not the same, right? B, the concentration of chlorine fluctuates widely. That does nothing. It's not even remotely the same. Yeah, I see a lot of people chiming in now. I think y'all are right. C goes in and out of style periodically, not helpful. And then booms, levels off, and then decreases in D. That decrease at the end, right? That's not what we're looking for. Everybody said E, you got it. Yeah. The variety of shoes increases rapidly, then flats, and then gradually increases. Awesome. Yeah, this is a fun little one. Analogy questions tend to be among the hardest, honestly, in the section. But this idea of just like doing a little sketch or something to kind of give yourself an idea of what you're analogizing to is not a bad idea at all. It's a really effective like aid here, really effective aid. Yeah. All right. I think we have one more. All right. Monroe. So we have a most vulnerable. This is a flaw question. What is the flaw in Monroe's reasoning, right? Flaw questions are weird. For one, they're a descriptive question, but also sort of an interactive question. In some of these, we're just describing the flaw. But in other ones, the flaw might be something like the author fails to consider blah, 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 which is really just a weekend, right? Like we're adding a new idea and saying the author should have thought about it. So when you're in a flaw question, you really have to think about that idea of like, am I just describing what's wrong, or am I actually like actively contributing to it being wrong? So let's check out Monroe. Monroe, despite his generally poor appetite, thoroughly enjoyed the 3 meals he ate at the Tip Top restaurant. But unfortunately, after each meal, he became ill. The first time, he ate an extra large sausage pizza with a side order of hot peppers. He ate the whole thing? Wow. The second time, he took full advantage of all-you-can-eat fried shrimp and hot peppers. Oh, that sounds terrible. And the third time, he had 2 tip-top giant meatball sandwiches with hot peppers. Since the only food all 3 meals had in common was hot peppers, Monroe concludes that it is solely I want to hit that word really hard here. Solely due to Tip Top's hot peppers that he became ill. The strength of a conclusion plays a huge role in a lot of questions on the LSAT, right? Think about the difference between saying, I am right, I am probably right, I might be right. Those are three different levels of intensity, and the amount of evidence and the type of evidence you need changes depending on the intensity. So here, Monroe said it is solely the hot peppers. That's a much, imagine that he had said Monroe concluded that the hot peppers contributed to him becoming ill, right? That would have been a much more defensible argument. So let's look. So A, he can draw his conclusion on the basis of too few meals that were consumed at Tip Top that included hot peppers. So A is hitting like a sample size idea, right? But the whole point is we're trying to ask what made him ill these 3 times. So of course the sample size is these 3 times. There's no sample size issue because our question is specifically about these 3. So A is out. B posits a causal relationship without ascertaining that's just like saying he didn't consider whether he ate the peppers after he became sick, which makes no sense. Like he ate the meals and then he became sick. So B is out because it's just incorrect. It's not describing the argument correctly. C, we're just going to kick. Allows his desire to continue there to bias it. Like, where did he even say that he wanted to keep going? D, he fails to establish that everyone, but it doesn't have to make everyone ill, right? That's not a good argument, right? Yeah, E, every single meal may have been a really big meal, and he may have gotten sick because if you eat an entire extra large pizza by yourself, there's a good chance you'll get sick, right? Like, and you can see here, E is kind of adding to the argument, right? We're adding a new concept. Maybe it was overeating. And so in this way, this flaw question is also kind of a weakened question at the same time. Yeah, and exactly, again, we're coming back, Scarlett hit this perfectly. We're coming back to causation, and this gave us an alternative cause, an alternative explanation for what's happening. 100%. All right, excellent. Y'all are kicking butt. All right. Oh, I'll turn it back over.
Hello. Very exciting. I love the conversations happening in the chat. I love, it's funny, Mika, people are hitting the nail right on the head, which I did not expect. Someone says, I love this. Thanks. We appreciate it. Actually, with that being said, we'd love your feedback. So we take all of our feedback very seriously. If you scan that QR code, it goes to a page, a survey, 4 or 5 questions. And what that allows us to do is just better these sessions, right? Like just do a better job, improve. Also lets us know what you want us to present about. So if there's a specific topic or a specific part of the LSAT or even the application process, all of that information is really important to us, and we want to make sure that we present them to you. How often do these webinars? Really great question. So we do a webinar a week. It's either on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays. Check out our website. And we cover all sorts of topics, right? So whether that be, I know Mika has done so many of these, everything from, application timelines to specific parts of the LSAT to resume building, you name it. So we want to make sure that we can cover that for you. With that being said,
I always appreciate feedback too. So anything I can do better or just praise me and help me get more raises. Either or.
Well said. So it's Q&A time. So just before I go through the questions, there was a comment earlier on that was sort of asking about our services and our pricing. If you want to learn more about that, what I can do, because neither Mika nor I are on the sales team, believe it or not, we're just good at other parts, but unfortunately that's not something that we're a part of. Just let me know in the chat and I can get one of our sales reps to reach out to you. Alternatively, you can book a free consultation as well, because I know there's a ton of questions about that. There's services we provide, our pricing, strategies, programs, et cetera, and we want to make sure that we get those questions answered as well. Okay, Mika, I think we have, maybe we can do 5 minutes worth of questions.
Yeah, if everybody's willing to stick, I'll stick for 5 more. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you so much. This question has come up quite a bit. Which LSAT prep books would you recommend?
There's really only one book I have a strong recommendation in favor of, which is The Loophole by Ellen Cassidy. It's an intro to logical reasoning book that I think very highly of. I don't use all of the same methods, but I think in terms of any book that is going to introduce you to that topic, that's the one to go with. Mike Kim's LSAT trainer is good too. I haven't used it much. I hear great things about it, and my understanding is it's like if you're going to self-study throughout the whole process, that's the book to go for. So those are the 2 big ones. I have a couple of resources for 170 plus scores. They're super huge 500 plus page books. So maybe I'll bring them up in like a 170 plus thing. But yeah, it's The Loophole. Yeah, if you just Google The Loophole LSAT, it'll bring it up on Amazon. Yeah.
We
those
have
are the
no
only books I
affiliation
really.
with that book.
Yeah, we have no
Other than-
affiliation. It's just a recommendation.
Yeah, it's a recommendation of book that is actually used. And somebody put it in the chat and actually linked it as well. So thank you, Scarlett.
Oh, thank you, Scarlett.
Yeah. And there's a lot of questions about resources. So again, another free resource vetted by all of our experts. We have a ton on our website, including like full-length practice tests you can take, and I can make sure that you get those in the follow-up of this recording. We have more information, guides about particular schools, guides about the LSAT. So we want to make sure that we provide you as many free resources as possible. Give me a moment. I'm just going to keep scrolling to the top. We have quite a few questions. Mika, did we already answer this? At what point do you recommend taking your first exam?
I usually recommend you start studying for at least a few weeks, because taking a diagnostic, like when you've literally done no prep, isn't really telling you much, right? I would usually take at least a few weeks of studying, get familiar with like the question types at minimum, and then take your first diagnostic. I think that's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm getting lost with all the questions. Bear with me, folks. I'm going to keep scrolling up. So this is just going back to just study materials, and anything else you recommend other than the specific book, any sort of programs or whatnot that you're able to speak to?
Yeah, I use LSAT Lab with students. It's a test prep website. So it's just 3 founders. They all used to be part of like Manhattan Elites or Manhattan Preps high-end stuff. And then they started their own website. I think it's the best one. I've looked at 7 Sage, obviously. I've looked at LSAT Demon, but I like LSAT Lab the best. But again, this is something you should educate yourself on before committing to anything, because the curriculums between the websites can be fairly different. So do a little bit of Googling and research and Redditing, and then make a final decision there. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. There's a really great question in the chat that's sort of about the admissions process as well. What factors more into getting into law school, your undergraduate GPA or your LSAT score?
Definitely LSAT score. Because it is much harder, like statistically, to achieve a high LSAT score than it is to achieve a high GPA. That's it, right? GPA, they don't know what your institution's grading curve is necessarily, and they don't know like how that performance necessarily reflects comparing to other students, but everybody takes the same LSAT and they're subject to the same curve, so it's a little bit better of a sorting mechanism, I would say. Yeah.
There was a question about accessibility. Let me find it because I think that was a really interesting question that I don't think we've ever gotten. Give me one moment.
Yeah, of course.
I know there was a question about earplugs. Any tips for someone studying with accommodations, anxiety, ADHD, etc.? And then there was a secondary question: can you wear earplugs, or do you need to request an accommodation?
There's one other question I wanted to address real quick, because this is something I always want to address when I see it. If you think you might be eligible for a fee waiver from the Law School Admissions Council, you should absolutely seek one. It will save you at least $1,000, if not more. I can't remember who asked that earlier, but if there's any chance that you are eligible for it, you should 100% get it, or 100% apply for it. Studying with accommodations. Well, so definitely apply for the accommodations for the LSAT, right? Figure out what sort of time setup they're going to have and what other accommodations you're going to be given. It depends, right? I've had students that are dyslexic, right? And the way you approach studying when you're dyslexic is different than the way someone with severe anxiety would approach studying, right? What I would definitely say is if you have anxiety and depression issues, then burnout is a much bigger potential concern, and you should be much more proactive in addressing your emotional and mental state. I don't know what more I can necessarily say beyond that. With regards to anxiety, though, I would definitely say this is a difficult exam because you're going to be wrong a whole bunch. And that hurts. You know, like every time we see that big red X next to one of our questions, it hurts a little. It pulls us down. I would just emphasize to you that is part of the process, and it doesn't reflect on you negatively at all. It's just you got to be wrong repeatedly before you can ace it. You know, so that would be like my big broad advice, I think. And then I think, did I miss part of the question? There was another part of the question.
I think you answered all of it.
Oh, okay.
If there was more to that question, I apologize. Please let me know. We can get Mika to finish it up. Okay, one more question, because I think this is a question that we get often. Does where you graduate from undergrad have an impact on law school admissions?
Minimally. So what I would say is, at the end of the day, schools care most about their ranking. And their ranking is not based on the quality of your undergrad. It's just based on your GPA and your LSAT score. Well, and then there's other stuff that plays into the ranking, but the school quality is not relevant. From an admissions officer standpoint, of course they're going to take note of those things. But at the end of the day, if like you're above both medians for that school, they're not going to care if you went to State College or you went to Harvard undergrad, right? You're above both medians. So it can play a smaller role, but I would also claim that that's somewhat elitist of admissions officers to do in the first place. So I don't think it'll hurt you negatively if you went to a lower quality undergrad. And again, I'm doing that in quotations because I don't think that that's like a, yeah. I don't think it will hurt you. Yeah. And I don't think it should.
Perfect. I think this is a really great time to wrap up tonight's discussion, Mika. Thank you again for being with us tonight. Thank you for sitting with us for an extra 20 minutes or so. If you had a question and we were not able to get to it, we are so sorry. Please get back to us via email, book a consultation. We will try our best to answer it for you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. As we mentioned, we do these weekly, so we're excited to have you.
Yeah.
I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
See y'all next week.
Bye, everyone.